There are three chemicals that you're going to use when cleaning wood: sodium hydroxide, sodium percarbonate, or sodium hypochlorite. For the guys that pressure wash regularly, sodium hypochlorite you're very familiar with. I'm going to kind of go over what the pros and the cons are to sodium hypochlorite, and then I'll tell you what I prefer to use, especially when you're prepping a deck for staining or sealing. So sodium hydroxide is the first chemical that's the strongest of the three. And while this is a great chemical to use, and it can actually be used as an oil-based stripper as well, it is very strong and can mess up grass, plants, and when I say mess it up, I mean kill. And it can as well mess up any kind of like stained glass windows or siding. So my suggestion, if you're going to use this, know how to use it. Make sure you're using it properly. So one of the things that I found out when I first started using it was that you can't pour water into this chemical. You need to pour the chemical into the water. If you don't, there's a chemical reaction that will happen, and it will create enormous amounts of heat and fumes. You will see smoke coming from whatever you're pouring or mixing into. Those are fumes, and those fumes are bad for you to breathe in, and you should stay away from them and try to prevent from making them. The other things is just making sure that everything is sealed off, and as far as the property goes, and everything's taped or bagged or plastic the way that it needs to be in order to use this. Watch your runoff when you're rinsing this stuff off of the wood, because again, this stuff is deadly to plants. So with that being said, I like to use sodium percarbonate. Sodium percarbonate is probably the weaker of the three, and it still does deck cleaning very well. What it does though is it requires you to actually use multiple passes on the wood, on really bad wood at least. So where people will come in and say like, oh, this is horrible, I'm just gonna make my mix a little hotter and throw it on there. You can do that a little bit with percarbonate and get away with it in comparison to sodium hypochlorite. So sodium hypochlorite, what it does is it actually has a really high pH, and when you apply it to the wood, it's giving that wood a high pH, and you're bleaching out the fibers. But more importantly, sodium hypochlorite is used in paper mills. It is used in paper mills to break down trees and help it make it easier to push that into pulp. And so what they do, what it does is it goes in and it breaks down the lignin in wood. Lignin is a compound in wood that is essentially is the glue to wood fibers that gives it its rigidity. It gives the firmness of wood. So when you apply SH to wood, what you're essentially doing is not only cleaning and sanitizing, but you're actually breaking down the glue that holds it all together. So you can use SH. I'm not saying we don't use SH. But if you're going to use SH, make sure that you're not one of those guys that's like, hey, I'm just going to throw like a super hot mix on this really dark wood because it's super dirty, and then I'm going to crank up the pressure and I'm going to rip this stuff off of here. Because what you're doing is you're destroying the fibers of the wood, and you're breaking apart the actual compounds that hold the wood together. The other thing that you're going to want to do if you're using SH is to understand how to lower that pH level. So when you throw copious amounts of water at that fence, but it's not going to pull all of that SH out, especially if you used a really hot mix. So what you need to do is try to get that pH to be lowered, and the way to do that is to use an oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is also known as a wood brightener, so this is a bonus because it's going to make your wood look great after you've cleaned it. And in addition to that, it's going to lower the pH of the wood, allowing it to be in optimal conditions when you go to stain or seal it. So my suggestion is using sodium percarbonate, and then after that following it up with some type of oxalic acid treatment in order to brighten the wood.